of Bobby Zirkin Live on Facebook. So it's a new thing during this coronavirus to have. I just thought it would be a really cool opportunity to bring some amazing people into everybody's living rooms and offices and all the rest through the miracle of Facebook, and bring really people that are doing great things in the community, in politics, in law, in sports. And I've got an announcement at the end of this about a Baltimore Raven who will be joining us next week for the second show. But today I am really excited to bring to you a great public servant, member of the House of Delegates first, and now a member of the Maryland State Senate, Jeff Waldstreicher from District 18 in Montgomery County. He's an incredible legislator and the vice chairman of my old committee, the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. So let me see if I can make this technology work and bring in, here we go, Senator Waldstreicher. I think that worked. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate it. Happy to be your guinea pig. This is great.
Well, it's great to see you and great to have you. How are things, first of all, how are things holding up with you and your family and all the rest during this pandemic?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's tough. It's tough for everyone, but we're fortunate. As you probably see in your neighborhood and around your community, there's like tons of doctors, first responders, folks who work at grocery stores who don't have the option to stay home. So we're home most of the day with the kids, and it's not easy, but it's a lot easier than all the heroes that are going out there working and risking their lives every day.
And what do you just as an introduction,
Yeah.
since most of the people that are probably on my feed aren't from Montgomery County and may not know you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do inside and outside of the General Assembly.
So yeah, I'm born and bred down here in Montgomery County, went to our public schools, graduated from Montgomery Blair High School, went to college and law school, then came back to Maryland and joined a large law firm, and kind of got into politics accidentally. Started doing some pro bono work for an advocacy group. There was a vacancy, and a whole bunch of shenanigans happened after that, but ended up serving in the House and then in the Senate, and I've loved every moment of it. And my family, has been great about the challenges that come when people serve in the legislature. You know that better than most, but it's just an honor and a privilege. And it's great. What's great about serving the legislature, as you know, is you serve with wonderful people, and we're surrounded by well-meaning folks of both parties, and that's what makes it different from Washington, and that's what makes it fun.
So I think probably people will take a look at you and see somebody who's young.
Yeah.
And you have darker hair, unfortunately, than I do at the
but
game.
Less.
So you have served, I saw from your bio, and we've talked, obviously, I know you quite well. You've served now, this is going to be your 15th year coming up in the General Assembly.
Yeah, January will be my 15th legislative session. So I was elected at 26, and all by accident. So here's the story. I was working for a law firm doing pro bono work for an environmental advocacy organization, and great group of folks. And there was a vacancy in my legislative district. Of course, back then, I didn't even know what legislative district I lived in. Most folks don't know what legislative district they live in. But they came to me and they said, hey, don't you live in that district where there was a vacancy announced? And we figured out that I did. That was the retirement of John Herson, Delegate Herson, who was chair of the Health and Government Operations Committee and a wonderful delegate who's still active in Annapolis circles. So they said, you should put your name forward for the Central Committee appointment, because as some of your viewers know, there's no special elections in Maryland. When there's a vacancy in the legislature, you have to go through the local Democratic Party. So I agreed to put my name forward, not knowing anything about the process. And they said, oh, no, we'll take care of it. And I remember I needed 11 votes to win that night. And I had called around and they had called around and they said, oh, yeah, you got your 11 votes. And I thought I was going to be the next delegate from District 18. So lo and behold, we had taken the vote. What's that?
We were having a little technical difficulty there for a second, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. So lo and behold, we take the vote that night among the Central Committee, and I don't get 11 votes. I get 4 votes, which was my first lesson in politics because I had 11 yeses, and I lost this Central Committee appointment. But through that process, I had met a bunch of great folks, advocacy organizations, party members, and advocates, and it was just really good. And so then there was another vacancy a little bit later, a regular election vacancy, and because I had gotten the bug, I was able to put my name forward a second time, and that one is when I won.
So you tried to get an appointment the first time, that didn't work out, and then you ran for office, and
That's right.
and
Yeah, yeah.
won at the age of 26 years old.
26 years old. Yeah, and to be honest,
I am definitely losing you right now. Can you still hear me, Jeff?
yes, I can hear you, Bobby. I got you.
I think we're having technical difficulties with your computer here. Is this Will Smith jumping in on us?
Well, I've got you, Bobby. You're 100% on my end.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put your family's picture up until we get you back.
Okay.
There you go. I think we got you. I'm going to put this
Okay.
in the stream just in case we lose you. At least we have the nice picture of your family there. So that's interesting. So you were appointed, did not get the appointment, but then ran and won your first time, and you've been serving ever since.
I've been serving ever since. I did 8 years on the Judiciary Committee in the House, where I know you served, and then 4 years on the Economic Matters Committee, and then joined you in the Senate and joined the Judicial Proceedings Committee.
So, so from the Judicial Proceedings Committee, you deal obviously as we have together for so many years with criminal law and civil procedure and family law and estates and trust. Can you describe to some, to the people who might be watching who don't know you, kind of your passion in terms of those issues and others that you're interested in?
Yeah, so I've always had a passion for civil rights and civil liberties issues, and specifically issues of what we now call returning citizens, people who are leaving incarceration and trying to get back on their feet and back in the community. And it's been a struggle to make progress on those issues, but over the last 12 years, with your help and so many others, we were able to pass a number of bills that allow people to clear their records, that get back on their feet in the community. If people can't get a job, as you know, after they get out of jail, they're just going to recidivate, and you need to have some type of intervention on the front end to prevent that from happening. So that includes job training, that includes clearing records, expungement, and shielding, and that includes linking them to housing and other resources.
So what are some of the bills that you've done, and kind of take people where, because I have a lawyer in my law firm that does, Eric Addis, who does a lot of that work in terms of trying to help people to expunge their records with the law. But if you could kind of describe some of the things that you've been doing, as well as maybe some of the things you think you'd like to see here in Maryland.
Yeah. Well, under your leadership, Bobby, we passed a number of bills that allow people to apply to the court to expunge or shield their criminal records. And that was a huge step forward. Maryland was really behind what other states were doing in terms of allowing people to get rid of their records. The problem is a lot of folks with records don't have the resources or tenacity to go through that process. It's bureaucracy. It requires a petition to the court. And as you see in your own office, sometimes it requires the assistance of an attorney. And so the question was, how do we make this easier? How do we help people clear the record in a way that just has less friction? And what we decided was some type of automatic shielding would be the better way to go, to get these off of case search and off of people's records without them having to apply for it. And so last year we passed a number of bills that would begin that process so that people don't have to petition the court to get rid of the record. The court will essentially self-petition to get rid of these records and get them off of case search and other record finding databases.
So, for example, something like a marijuana possession, let's say.
That's
so
right.
If somebody were to get that, then it would be automatically shielded from case search. Is that essentially?
That's right. And we're going to do it forwards and backwards. In other words, if you have a minor marijuana conviction, previously, because of bills you passed, Bobby, someone could apply to get that expunged. Now, under a bill we passed this past session, and just to be clear, it hasn't been signed by the governor yet, someone wouldn't have to apply. That crime would be automatically expunged from that person's record. And then on a going forward basis, if someone is convicted of those crimes after a certain period, they would be expunged automatically on a going forward basis. So we're doing both directions in time, which was a big deal. As you probably know, we are likely at some point in the future to legalize recreational marijuana. So allowing anyone to have a marijuana offense that's minor on their record is just hypocritical if that's the direction we're going. And so this was a good step from a kind of civil justice and criminal justice point of view. And it's just the right thing to do given where we're going in the state.
That's really interesting. Yeah, you've been a leader on that for years. I wanted to know
Thank
where
you.
we were heading. I saw that actually. It's interesting. I was going to bring this up later on, but I saw there you serve on a number of committees. Some I knew you served on, and some I was unaware
Yeah,
of. One of them is, in fact, and obviously there's so much going on in the world right now
right. Yeah,
taking a step back from some of these issues. They seem unimportant in kind of the broader scope of what's going on in the world right now.
right.
But it is interesting to talk about them. You serve on the commission dealing with the issue of legalization of marijuana. I know it's something of interest to people. Where is that at this point in time? I still get questions about it, even though
Yeah.
I'm out of office now. But where is that commission, and kind of where do you see, if you had a crystal ball, where do you see that issue heading?
So the short answer is it's on pause right now. As you know, there has been kind of tumult in the marijuana industry, both the medical side and the recreational side, and we have to get that all sorted out before we move forward as a state. The commission itself, as you know, you were the chair of the commission briefly, and now President Ferguson, I
Very
think,
briefly.
yeah, President Ferguson, who's done such an incredible job as our new Senate president, has took over that work group and kind of move the ball forward. And that's where we went before we pressed pause on everything. And COVID-19 has clearly delayed a lot of things, and this will be one of them. So if I had a crystal ball, I'd say within this term, we will move forward on some type of marijuana reform, recreational marijuana reform. So two more sessions left in this term. So probably next session or the following session. That would be my hope at least.
Okay, and
Yeah.
that would require a lot of Zoom meetings between now and January, probably.
We're all getting to be experts at Zoom meetings, so hopefully we can make it happen.
Sounds good. Well, it's
Yeah,
something I know a lot of people are interested in, have very strong opinions on one way or the other. So
yeah,
hopefully we can come back and do this again as that starts moving
absolutely.
forward. Another commission, which kind of goes into the one that you were talking about before, that you also serve on, which I find to be a fascinating one, is which I'm sure that it will sound kind of obscure to people who aren't in the legal field, but is a really interesting one, is this commission on the classification of crimes.
Yeah,
How, if you can talk a little bit about that. I know you serve on that. I don't know if you're
sure.
the chair of that now or where that stands, but
So I got to start by giving credit where credit's due. So Mike Huff, Senator Mike Huff, who represents Frederick in the Senate, it was his idea. He worked for a number of years to pass that bill, kind of look at crime classifications in Maryland. What should be a misdemeanor? What should be a felony? And Senator Mary Washington, our colleague, your former colleague, is the chair of that commission, and she's doing an incredible job and cares deeply about the issue. And of course, she served for 1 year on the Judicial Proceedings Committee. So for your viewers, Maryland is an outlier. Most states have a clear definition of what's a misdemeanor and what's a felony based on either the seriousness of the crime or the amount of time that can be incarcerable related to that crime. So the way you learned it in law school, or I learned in law school, most states it's a year or under is a misdemeanor. Anything over a year is a felony. That's what most states do. That's what the federal government does. And there's a certain logic to that. In Maryland, there is absolutely no rhyme or reason, no logic. You have 10-year misdemeanors, you have life imprisonment felonies. It's just, there are so many things that are incongruous in our code. And Mike Huff decided we need to take a look at this and see if we can provide some logic to it. And so it's a tough task because it's a line drawing task, but because we've got Republicans and Democrats dedicated to doing it, it'll be, I think it'll get done. And we've got a lot of outside technical assistance from the law schools, from the judges, from retired judges as well. It'll be good. And so it's not just an intellectual exercise. The whole point of doing this is that once you have a clear delineation between felonies and misdemeanors, then you have the ability to make certain macro changes about how you treat each. You can say, oh, all misdemeanors are expungible, or all felonies are, are ineligible for parole until this point. Right now, because you have a mishmash, you can't do those macro things. You've got to take them crime by crime, and that makes life difficult for us as legislators.
It's a fascinating commission. It's you're diving as people, as somebody who's interested in criminal law, although I don't do criminal law in my private practice, the the number of misdemeanors and felonies and the rhyme and reason to them
Right.
don't often make a lot of sense or don't seem
Right.
to make sense, but they made sense to some legislature at some point in time. So it's really great that you guys are tackling that issue. It's a
Well, and credit to the new chair, Will Smith, who's done an incredible job under challenging circumstances. A lot of the initiatives that you were passionate about, including that one, he has continued on and is equally passionate about. And so much of the things that you got the ball rolling on, he has made it a point to continue, even if they weren't of his own initiative originally. And that provides a lot of continuity for the committee and allows people to continue working on things that they were passionate about.
I tried very hard to get him to blast into your interview here today, but I could not figure out the technology on it. So
Well, he's a chairman. He's a busy man,
he's
and
a busy man.
I know he's helping his constituents on a lot of issues related to COVID-19. So hopefully you can have him on sometime soon. I'm sure he'd love
Absolutely.
to join.
Yeah, he's great. And if he calls in here, I'll definitely am going to get him.
Okay, good.
You're getting some questions on the side here, so maybe we'll get to some of these.
Okay, I didn't want to be rude and look over, but
Yeah, it's okay. No, there's some interesting ones, issues about COVID-19 and workers' compensation and some other
yeah,
things. Before we get to that, though, there are a number of bills that you did, and I could do this with you forever. This is great. I love listening to what's going on and hearing this. I hope people are interested in it's the things that legislators like yourself deal with are such a myriad of issues, and just on the committee you're talking about. The number of issues that you'll hear in a single day, let alone the entire 90 days, is just unbelievable, the breadth and depth of them. So I saw some of the bills that you put in. A couple of them had to do with the civil justice system, or plaintiff versus defendant type issues. One of them was about a constitutional amendment for the amount in controversy.
right.
If you could describe kind of what is that all about and where is that issue?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Maryland, like a few other states, has two different trial level courts. And so for civil cases, whether you go to the lower trial level court or the upper trial level court depends on the amount in controversy. In other words, the amount that someone is suing over. And so we want our courts to be really accessible. And what that means is you'd rather have more cases at the lower level court where discovery rules are a little more lax and things are easier for people who are seeking civil justice.
A little less expensive as well.
That's right. Right. Yes. No question about it. That's right. And so Maryland, in its constitution, delineates an amount by which one case goes to the upper level trial court and one case goes to the lower level trial court. And so because inflation takes a bite out of that amount, and because cases tend to get more and more expensive, we then have to go back and change the Constitution, usually around once a decade, to change the amount that delineates between the upper level trial court and the lower level trial court. So I put in a bill this year, a constitutional amendment that would increase the amount that would be allowed in the lower level court to make sure that those courts remain accessible to folks. And unfortunately, the bill didn't move. It didn't have time to move this year. So we've got, because it has to go on the ballot, we've now got 2 years to pass it. Certainly my hope that we do so.
Is that something that's likely to pass for those who work in the civil justice system? Is that a bill that is, because that's one of those things that you hear about year after year. Is that a bill that likely has legs down in Annapolis over the next couple of years?
So we haven't done it in I think since 1997, if that's right, maybe a little bit later. But it's time to do it again. I think all the advocates, whether you support the bill or oppose the bill, know that at least once a decade we have to come back and do it. So there'll be some, I guess, negotiation as to the amount. but I think it's going to happen, and likely not next year, but the year after, the next constitutional opportunity, which is 2022.
And if you recall the specifics of it, is it because right now it's 15? So
That's
is
right.
this an attempt to move it up to 30? There have been machinations of that 20, 25, 30.
Yeah,
Is what version of
I,
it?
I think that's all in the discussion. We put it in, I believe, at 30. Certainly open to ideas from advocates on both sides, but the idea is to hopefully get it to 30. And what that means is people who are seeking civil justice can do so at lower cost, with a lower discovery burden, in a way that's accessible and fair to them in the lower trial court level.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Really interesting, and would be something for people to watch.
yeah,
Another civil justice bill, and this is one that you and I have talked offline
yeah,
about, but I do think particularly now, and just to set the table with COVID-19 and all of these healthcare workers that are in hospitals and on the front lines, as well as frontline workers like police and firefighters and so forth that are also working on the front lines of this. An issue you put in had to do with something obscure, fairly obscure, or what I thought was obscure when we first talked
right,
about it,
yeah.
the fireman's rule, and it's become very interesting, since the legislative session ended. If you could talk a little bit about that, it is, I think, for those who are doctors, nurses, certainly police and firefighters,
Right.
it's of something that's of intense interest.
Yeah. So the fireman's rule, is archaic in part because we call it the fireman's rule and not the firefighter's rule, right? Workman's comp has long been called workers' comp, and so the fireman's rule is old, and in fact, it goes back to the 1600s in England. And here's what it says: if you're a public employee and you take a risk as part of your job, if someone is negligent towards you in the course of that job, you cannot collect in our civil courts. And so, if you're a firefighter and you go to a house and you're on the roof and you fall through and that house was burned down because of arson, you can't sue the arsonist. You can't collect from the person who caused your damages. And that's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Of course, our firefighters assume certain risks when they take that job. Our police officers, nurses, all our public employees assume a certain amount of risk, but that doesn't mean, it doesn't logically follow that they can't collect against people who are bad actors, and who act out against them in some way that's negligent or malicious. And here's why it's important during this kind of period of COVID-19. We've got tons of public employees who are forced to go to work because they're essential and want to go to work because they're providing a public service that they believe in. But if someone were to act negligently towards them, and I know you have some good examples of this, Bobby, then they wouldn't be able to use our civil system in order to seek compensation for damages that happen to them. And so, for example, if you're a nurse and you're a state employee or a county employee, and your hospital won't provide you with adequate PPE and you get sick, if you die, your family will not be able to seek damages because you assume the risk as a nurse. And that doesn't make any sense. And it's just wrong.
So it's interesting. So I mean, obviously, you could recover in workers' comp, although
Correct.
there's a lot of talk now about, you know, groups want to have liability, kind of immunity,
Right. Right.
based on what they're doing. So if a police officer, just to have an example, to make sure because it's all these things are so changing because of
Right.
COVID-19. If a police officer brought somebody to the emergency room and somehow um, got sick, but was in the official course of their duty because of somebody else's negligence, it this issue would shield that individual from suit against the police officer because essentially they assume the risk as a public safety official. Is that essentially the way that the law stands right now?
That's exactly right. So if a public employee like a firefighter or a police officer gets sick on the job right now, the only way that they can recover is through workers' comp. And that's as it should be, where there's no bad actor or no negligence. But if someone does something that is malicious or negligent to that officer that causes them to get COVID-19, in other words, fails to provide them with protective gear or otherwise does something that is for like purposely gives them the disease, they wouldn't be able to get compensation from that person. It's an archaic rule. It goes back centuries. It goes back to England. And most other states have gotten rid of this. Conservative states, Democratic states, liberal states, Republican states. Lots of folks have gotten rid of this, and it's, in my mind, time for Maryland to do the same.
Really interesting issue. I hope people who are listening to this, if there are anybody, if there are folks listening to this, see just the incredible breadth of issues that you have to deal with and be expert and have expertise on. It's amazing to me. So.
Yeah, I mean, here's the other thing, because we talk about amount and controversy and we talk about the fireman's rule. Sometimes people think this is an issue related to plaintiff's attorneys. I'm not a plaintiff's attorney. This is not the type of law I practice. And to me, it's not an issue of defense attorneys versus plaintiff's attorneys or people versus corporations or anything like that. If you believe in access to courts, you believe in access to courts. If you believe people should have a right to go in front of a judge and plead their case and say what happened to them and determine whether they have the ability to be compensated for injuries. And if you believe in that, you have to create laws that allow for that. So I know sometimes it's easy, especially in Annapolis, to view this as a two-sided issue. I've never viewed it that way. I've always viewed it as our courts are there to help people, and the more access we can provide to those courts, the better for everyone.
It's great. We will again stay tuned. How do you see just to take a shot away
Yeah,
from issues, although I have a whole bunch here just
good.
to talk about. The list of bills that you introduced last year are really interesting. And I did want to talk about two in particular that are very controversial. But before we get to that, where do you see kind of like first of all, I guess, how are things going? I think people are used to a 90-day legislative session where things
Right.
get done and the balloons drop down on the last day, and the president of the Senate and the speaker get the picture with the balloons and it's all done. How did things go this year? Because it was really towards the end of session that things started rolling with this pandemic.
That's right.
So how was it this year, and what was the feeling down in the General Assembly, and how did things change because of it?
Well, they change quickly. So I remember, so as you recall, we often vote in committee on Fridays, and I remember March 6th was a Friday, and my kids were leading synagogue that evening, and so we got our voting done, and I headed over to synagogue back in Montgomery County, and I remember being in this crowd and starting to feel uncomfortable and thinking, man, this doesn't feel safe. And by that Monday, the following Monday, things were starting to snowball very, very quickly. And thank God for Speaker Adrian Jones and President Bill Ferguson. They recognized it right away. And so there was a triage effect. We had to act quickly because we have a constitutional obligation to pass a budget, and we have a constitutional obligation to make sure our public schools are sufficient for our children. And we had legislation pending on both of those issues. And so they moved decisively, aggressively, along with the governor to start putting together a package of legislation addressing COVID-19, including unemployment insurance, stimulus, all the things you need to do if we were going to adjourn quickly, as well as pass the budget and pass the Kerwin recommendations for our public schools. And so, there's no question it was crazy and a bit chaotic, but not so much that people weren't thinking deeply and thoughtfully about how to do it. And no one was doing more than President Ferguson and certainly our chair, Will Smith, as we kind of were working through these issues. We had to figure out what needed to move this year and what could wait till next year. And unfortunately, for a lot of my priorities, that meant they're going to wait till next year, and that's fine.
That's what they told you anyway.
This is true. But everyone could see that this was going to get much more dangerous and that we had to act quickly. And the second someone in the legislature got infected, you wouldn't have a quorum able to legislate. And so that's part of the reason we had to act so swiftly and end the legislative session.
And it ended, what, a week or two early, or?
Yeah, so it ended on March 18th, so about 3 weeks early.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was the right thing to do, no question about it.
All right. It was interesting to watch because the world was coming to a standstill, and you could see, kind of day to day that you were trying to rush through to get some of these couple of these
Sure.
big ticket things done because you had to constitutionally.
That's right.
And prepare for what was coming with people staying at home and so forth.
Yeah, and I think your viewers know this, but you know, obviously, I'm giving high praise to my presiding officer and as well as Speaker Jones. What people might forget because they're so good at what they do is that this was both of their first years as presiding officers. So the fact that they were able to act so decisively and so gracefully under difficult circumstances, it wasn't a given. One or both of them could have fallen flat on their faces, but neither did, and just goes to show you what leaders both of them are.
That was my last official act in the Senate was to vote for Bill.
But it was a good vote. He's doing an incredible job.
Yeah, yeah. I speak with him often. He is. It's a pressure filled job, that's for sure.
Yep.
Under the best of circumstances,
Yep.
let alone now.
Yep.
Couple more issues before we kind of move on to some
Sure.
other things. This has been a little weighty, but that's the thing. It's good. I think it's important and certainly educational for me and hopefully for others who are watching. But there was an issue that I see here related to, and this is very weighty, but a case before the Court of Appeals, I believe, and about child pornography. If you could speak a little bit about, I saw you had a bill on that it doesn't look like it passed. So I'm
That's right.
curious what that's all about and where that issue is at this point.
Yeah. So from time to time, we look at what the Court of Appeals does and figure out whether they did the right thing and whether we need to act legislatively. This case was interesting because what happened was, and I don't mean to get explicit with your viewers, a girl took a video of herself performing a sex act on a young man who was an adult. He was not identifiable in the video. She was identifiable in the video. And then later, that video was released on some kind of social media. And she was charged with essentially being her own pornographer. So she was charged with producing child pornography. And then the victim of that child pornography was her. And this was a fascinating thing that had never been litigated, but it went to the Court of Appeals, which upheld the conviction.
She was convicted. Did she serve time in jail?
I don't think she served time in jail because she was a juvenile.
Oh, she was a juvenile, right?
That's right. But basically, the Court of Appeals, in a way I rarely see them do, begged the legislature to fix this. They said, this is the letter of the law. If you read the letter of the law, she can be her own child pornography victim. But this doesn't create a good outcome. How is it good for her to be convicted of producing child pornography in which she is the victim? And so they asked us to come forward and find a solution. Well, I think 5 members took the court up on coming up with that solution, and we all came up with different solutions. And that was a challenge because with a shortened session, we didn't have the opportunity to try to take all 5 of those and mesh them together in a way that worked in the real world. And so we're going to have to fix this at some point. But you've got essentially this case, and I don't begrudge the court for finding what they did. I think they're right on the letter of the law. They had to do what they did. But we've got to fix this because lots of kids do lots of stupid things, including taking naked videos of themselves, and it shouldn't be considered a criminal act under our code.
Got it. It's I remember hearing about that case. I had thought that it was 2 underage individuals at the time, but maybe the details of that are hazy. But interesting issue before our courts if the courts ever open up again, which
right,
because they are at this point permanently closed until further notice. So
that's right.
I'd like to see them open up again. And then the last issue I did want to ask you about, if it's okay.
Of course.
Keep this maybe a little. Keep it light as best we can.
Sure.
But it's the Israel and Moyer Act, or the kind of the death with dignity type of an issue.
Yep.
You're the lead sponsor of that issue. Is that correct?
I am. Yep. The chairman was the sponsor the previous year when he was vice chair, and I was sponsor this past year.
Okay, and that did not pass this year. And this is essentially trying to wiggle through the issue of giving people choice at the end of their life as to what to do with their life with the assistance somehow of the medical community. Is that essentially?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so I feel strongly about this, and the reason I feel strongly about it is just as an issue of liberty, as an issue of personal control. I think people at the end of life should be able to make decisions about what they do and don't do, and that has everything to do with personal autonomy. And so this issue has gotten bogged down related to medicine and legal liability and things like that. And those things are not things we can kind of um, put under the rug, but nonetheless, at its core, for me at least, it's an issue of liberty, and allowing people to make choices at the end of their lives is is an important issue of liberty and personal autonomy for me. So, but we've been honest with folks. We're likely 2 votes short on that bill. It'll be an uphill um, challenge to pass the bill, but I'm committed to do it, and I know there are other advocates who are committed to doing it.
Very weighty issues you have to deal
Yep,
with
no
there.
question.
All
Yeah,
right.
no,
So what is there anything that I missed? Those were kind of the yellow marker highlights that I saw from your
yeah.
2020 legislative session. Anything that I missed there? We've got
Well,
a
let me,
lot of questions on the side here, which we
yeah,
can or don't have to get into. A lot about workers' comp, bail reform, the war
marijuana.
on drugs. I'm seeing a lot of different
Yeah.
issues here. Kerwin and funding, and somebody that just wanted to say hello. So as
Well, let me give a shout out to the chairman, to Will Smith for leadership on 3 big issues that came in front of our committee. The first is the decriminalization of poverty. As you know, people get wrapped up in fines and fees in a way that can get them put in jail or get them in debt.
whoa, Jeff, I lost you. All right, I think we lost Jeff for a second. Hopefully we can get him back. I'm going to put his picture up then. All right, I'm going to try to get him back. But anyway, interesting issues. I think some of the things that he was going to talk about, he had told me beforehand, had to do with something called the Home Act, the Crown Act. There were hate crimes legislation and other things. I think Jeff is coming back. See, this is our first broadcast, and already having technical difficulties. Let me just give. Oh, I do have Jeff back. Jeff, can you hear me? All right, let's get. Oh, and he's gone again. So while we're trying to get him back, and we see this beautiful picture of him and his family, I was going to do something at the end of this, but next week, hopefully with fewer technical difficulties, we are going to have a really special guest. And I alluded to this at the beginning, so let me just talk about it a little now while we're waiting for Jeff, hopefully, to get back here. Next Wednesday, looks tentatively at 2:30. We're going to be joined by Bradley Bozeman and Nikki Bozeman. And for those of you who are Redskins fans, you can close your ears for right now. And if you're a Patriots fan or a Steelers fan, need not listen ever. But Bradley Bozeman and Nikki Bozeman will be joining us next week. Bradley is the starting left guard for the Baltimore Ravens, and his wife Nikki is a tremendous athlete in her own accord. She was the starting center for the University of Alabama women's basketball team, and was a star when Bradley and Nikki graduated from Alabama. Brad was drafted by the Baltimore Ravens, I believe in the 6th round, and last year was our starting left guard. Fabulous football player, and more importantly, he has an anti-bullying foundation. I do see we have Jeff back in the bottom. We'll get to him in one sec. Bradley and Nikki have been on a mission in college and through their time here in Baltimore about anti-bullying, which is an issue that's really important to me. They have gone to countless numbers of schools in Alabama and now here in Maryland, talking to kids about the dangers of bullying. And this year, just after the football season was over, Brad and Nikki took off in an RV around the country and started here in Maryland and went all the way out to the West Coast, and we're heading back before the coronavirus stopped their plans. But they were talking to kids in schools, state by state by state. I think did 12 or 13 states before the tour had to be stopped, and it was just an amazing thing. I saw a video of it. You may have seen this in the Baltimore Sun and elsewhere, but just they're going to come on and talk about anti-bullying and their efforts around the country and why it's such a big passion to both of them, and anything else that folks would like to talk about. All right, so let me bring Jeff back in here. Let's put you back in and let's see if we can get you. There you are. We'll take out that picture. Can you hear me?
I gotcha.
All right, welcome back.
Hey, you know, when you have Brad
got a
Boatwright,
text-
you're gonna have to get a bigger screen here.
Yeah, I'll figure all this technology stuff out. This is a sideshow. You know, wanted to take a break from practicing law and do something interesting and maybe do some interesting interviews. Technology is not my thing, but there have been a couple questions. If you don't mind taking a couple from some on the audience, is that okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so somebody wanted to know if I'd be tailgating before Bradley Bozeman. That is a yes. No, but we have a question here regarding, what do we got here? Oh, is Senator Waldstreicher aware of any legislative proposals in the area of workers' comp, whether related to COVID-19 or otherwise? That's a technical issue. I know that's not in your committee, but.
Right, yeah. I imagine that there's going to be a whole portfolio of issues that will be part of what we do when we come back, likely in January. And workers' comp is going to have to be part of that. So like you said, Bobby, it doesn't come in front of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, but we're going to have to deal with a lot of these issues, and that'll be one of them. No question about it.
Yeah, because obviously with COVID-19, kind of what you were talking about with the fireman's rule, these issues are there. If somebody goes to a grocery store,
right,
and these stores are looking for liability, protection, but
right.
at the end of the day, somebody goes there and they get sick, they obviously need compensation maybe beyond the workers' comp. That's where the PI and workers' comp come in, but
that's right.
should be interesting to see how that plays out. Somebody wanted to ask if there's anything about bail reform. Interesting question. I know that's an issue that we've dealt with before. Was there any issue? Was there anything on that particular issue?
I don't think so, because we've done so much on it previously, on bail reform, and I know you and I had occasionally differing views on that. But there's no silver bullet on bail reform. I think people realize that the previous system was unfair and inequitable, and you don't want to criminalize poverty and have people behind bars simply because they can't afford bail. But we know that the alternative system has meant that sometimes people who otherwise had the opportunity to get out are now not getting out, and that you might have a higher proportion of people being denied bail. And so we've got to figure this out. A lot of the solution in my mind will have to do with increasing use of monitoring, and monitoring it in a way that's fair and equitable, and doesn't repeat some of past issues of discrimination or other things like that. And so we've got to get this right. I think a lot of the reform will be in a few years as we fully digest everything we previously did.
Okay. It's a complicated issue. These are all very
question.
complicated issues. I always said to people about our committee, and the one that you are the vice chairman of, when you make a mistake on the details, somebody loses their life, right? Like the generic kind of bumper sticker stuff that people think of, it doesn't really hold true. Like it's
That's right.
There's the kind of the philosophy, which is fine, but then there's the words on the page, and if you get the words on the page wrong, even if your philosophy is right, somebody can get hurt. Somebody can really get hurt if you screw it up. So it's important to get it right. So it's good listening to all these issues. So you were starting to talk about some of the things that that Will had been championing this year, the Home Act, and what else?
Yeah, and the Crown Act. And so the Crown Act is a bill that's been around for a long time, but as you know, we don't allow racial discrimination in Maryland. That's a very good thing. But sometimes people use physical appearance as a proxy for race. But that makes it sometimes people have difficulty proving racial discrimination when in fact folks are just using racial proxies. And one of the big things that people use is they use African American hairstyles against African American employees or applicants. And that's racist and it's unfair. And so we essentially defined race to also include certain hairstyles that are associated with race. especially African American hairstyles. And so that's the Crown Act. It's important for African American women, especially, but it's important for African Americans generally. It passed on a bipartisan basis. Republicans on the committee voted for it. Republicans on the floor voted for it. And that wouldn't have moved but for the leadership of Chairman Will Smith.
Is that also, are the details of that bill, is it just racial, or is it also religious and other forms of discrimination? Like, does it go beyond? So for instance, in my community,
Sure.
like the Orthodox Jewish community might have, kind of longish hair,
Right.
Sideburns. I think, like, does it protect religious communities as well as racial?
So that's a really good question. And so what we determined is that those issues that are affiliated with religion, so payas, beer, yarmulke, and the like, are already protected because that's considered a practice of their religion. And so it didn't need to be specified in the bill because those religious practices are already protected under current law.
Okay.
And so dealt mainly with hairstyles that are closely associated with race, what African Americans or generally people refer to as protective hairstyles. Protective not being the legal term like protected, but protective meaning protecting the ends of the hair. So things like twists, braids, and the like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. I hope people understand also, because you would often hear like people say, well, why are you wasting time with this issue, that issue, this issue? You get how many bills there? It's about 3,000 or so bills every year.
Yeah.
You are required to get through every one of them. So there's big issues and small issues and
That's
everything
right.
in between, and you kind of walk and chew gum at the same time.
That's right. And so that's what's different from DC for folks who don't follow Annapolis closely. In DC, not every bill is guaranteed a hearing. In fact, most bills don't receive a hearing whatsoever. In Annapolis, every bill that's put in is guaranteed a hearing. That creates a lot of work and challenges in terms of bandwidth, challenges in terms of seeing our families and the like. I know you lived through that for many, many years. And it's not easy, but it is the right thing to do. And it means everyone gets their voice heard.
Great. Question for you. Somebody just wanted to know. That's an interesting. You and I had actually asked you this offline before. If you can you see the questions on the side here?
I can see the question. Yeah.
So they wanted to know what happened with the GET bill, and for those
Right.
who were what did happen with that? That's a bill, by the way, that I saw when I was in the House of Delegates my very first year in the General Assembly. That's 22 years ago, 21, 22 years ago. So
Right.
I heard it was back. What happened with that bill? If you could tell what that is.
Yeah, good question. So in Orthodox Jewish communities, which Bobby, I know you used to represent for many years, and a small portion of my district in Kent Mill, I represent, for someone to get a divorce in an Orthodox Jewish community, the man is required to provide a religious document to the woman, and that religious document is called a get. And there have been abuses of the get, men who withhold the get in order to leverage certain things or just out of spite. And so there's been this movement in the General Assembly for many years to see if there is a civil remedy to prevent abuse of the get. The Orthodox community, the people who you might think would be worried about interference between government and religion, has supported the bill. And New York has had this legislation for many, many years. So supporters believe it is constitutional. This past year was put in by my colleague Cheryl Kagan. She's the vice chair of the Education and Health Committee. So the bill had a tough hearing. There's no question about it. And one of the great things about our chamber is that hearings matter. They're not just kind of show trials for each bill. You really get to the merits of each bill during the hearing. So it had a tough hearing, and I'm not sure it would have moved even if we had the time, but certainly because of lopping off 3 weeks, that definitely meant that bill was dead, at least for last session.
It is a tough constitutional issue,
Right?
right? You essentially you feel for the people that are kind of chained by this inability to get a divorce within their religion, although they can still get one within the civil. It doesn't allow them to remarry within that particular. But at the same time, you're having the state say you have to do something religious in order to get something civil. So it's gets a little constitutionally hairy.
No question. And you had people on the right who were worried about that interference. And then, back when this bill was first heard, Senator Jamie Raskin was in your chamber at the time, and he brought down the bill, I think, when it was last heard in and 7, and obviously Jamie, identified as kind of a left-leaning politician on the Democratic side. And so you have both sides with objections, a lot of people in the middle who want to support the bill and find a way through, but it's been a challenge constitutionally.
Interesting. So those are the issues. Anything else that was particularly controversial this year, or things that you're looking forward to next year? And then we'll get towards to wrapping up a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think like you, everyone's looking to a return to normalcy, but we've got to do it safely and thoughtfully. And I know Governor Hogan is dedicated to doing this at the right pace and with science in mind. And so I haven't made the pivot to next legislative session just because we're still in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. And so, what I do day to day, and I'm sure you're hearing from people on your side, even as you're not in elective office anymore, is folks are looking for help. People need help with food and basic needs. People need help with government services like unemployment insurance and the like. And so my job is just to listen and to connect people to resources so that they can get the help that they need. And one of the things we're seeing right now is, right after this hit, you had people who were kind of living on the economic edge who really needed resources quickly because they were worried about losing a roof over their head or food off the table. But this has impacted a lot of people. I've got employees, white collar employees who live in my district. And now we're 6 weeks into this and they're starting to hit their economic edge. In other words, they had a little bit of a cushion and that cushion is running out. And so this isn't something that only affects vulnerable people, although certainly it affects them in a disproportionate way. It's starting to affect everyone in very dramatic ways.
It definitely is. But yeah, your office must be inundated with people trying to get assistance at this point. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
no question. We're happy to help. It's an important part of our job.
Do you want me to give your cell phone out to everybody? So
you can get my cell phone. I'm gonna do it right now.
It's
put it on the Chiron.
Yeah, right. I can't figure out how to do that. It is it's affecting everybody. I think the governor's doing a great job. I mean, that's just my personal opinion.
Sure.
He has
agree.
been a voice of reason in the country. Forget it, obviously here in Maryland, but a voice of calmness and reason in the country, where I feel like it's necessary to have one. He and Governor Cuomo both, I think, have done a really nice job of keeping things calm where there has been a lot of craziness coming out of DC. That's just my personal opinion, but
Yep, you're exactly right. I agree 100%.
So how is your family, before we wrap up, just so then we've gotten into a lot of heavy issues here, but how's your family holding up with things, and what comes what's next, and as you move towards January?
Yeah, they're hanging in there. I've got twins that are 10, and boy-girl twins. My daughter Kate, my son Eli. Oh, are you pulling up the photo?
Let's put them up.
Right.
I was able to pull it off the internet and onto this and onto Facebook
Thank
Live.
you for doing that.
So that's a beautiful picture.
Yeah. So you see my son Eli in the blue shirt, my daughter Kate with the red hair, my son Harry, who my wife is holding there. And so they're all in elementary school, fourth grade, and first grade. So it's a lot of Zooms throughout the day. It requires a lot of parental assistance. And so my wife works, but she's been pretty flexible about things. I try to be flexible about things. So I help them, I help constituents, and then, hopefully get them down at a reasonable hour, find an hour or two for the last dance, which I know you and I have talked about, catching up on other stuff and just turning my brain off for, an hour right before sleep each night.
Are you up to date on The Last Dance?
I'm up to date on The Last Dance. I was so fascinated. I forgot how amazing Dennis Rodman was as a defender, because people think of him as a rebounder. And of course, he was just preternatural when it came to rebounding. But his defense, when you saw the video, you're like, oh, wow, I remember that.
Yeah.
On both teams. On the Pistons.
And crazy as a loon. I have a picture of it.
Everyone remembers the crazy. But it's easy to forget how amazing he was as a basketball player.
Yeah. And that was, I think that hopefully that video has put to rest any thought that any of these young kids have that somehow the Warriors or LeBron's teams or anything would ever hold a candle to the Jordan years.
Not for 1 second.
Not even close. So, well,
how's your family holding up?
They're good. They're
Yeah.
good. They're, I'm a lawyer and teacher and figuring out technology and doing new things and trying to get some exercise and kind of like everybody else and
Yep.
hoping and praying that the world gets back. My brother's an emergency room doctor, and so it is very hard. I mean,
I'm sure.
he is on the front line every single day, and it's scary. So,
Well,
but
God
thanks for
bless
asking
him
me.
and God bless his family. I'm sure it's difficult.
Thank you. Thanks for asking. Well, listen, it was great having you on this. Thank you for being my
Of
very
course.
first interview. It was great really hearing about what happened in the legislative session right before the world stopped. And it was interesting for me. I hope if anybody was watching, I hope it was interesting for them as well. So let me just do a quick thing. I was doing it when I lost you for a couple minutes, but next week, you're a Redskins fan, aren't you?
I am a Redskins fan, a long-suffering Redskins fan. It's difficult.
That just took you down a couple of notches from this wonderful interview. But I am an avid Ravens fan, and we have next week coming on the show, Bradley Bozeman, who I was talking about before, left guard for the Ravens, and his amazing wife, Nikki, to talk about their anti-bullying efforts. And I know you were instrumental in helping to get Grace's Law across the finish line. Maryland, for those who don't know, has the foremost law in terms of cyberbullying in the country, and Bradley and his wife Nikki have been going around all across the state and now all across the country, spreading the message about anti-bullying, and they're going to be here to talk about their foundation and all the amazing things they've been doing, and so it's going to be very cool. It's not Jeff Waldstreicher, but it is a close second. But
NFLers. This is going to be a great show, Bobby. Bobby Zirkin Live is a wonderful idea. A lot of great content during a time when people are looking for something to distract them from time to time. And so I think this is wonderful. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks for coming. And for those who viewed and who were there, I see Delegate McComas said to say hello. And I just want to say, Jeff, thank you for being our first. And we'll definitely have you back as session draws near, maybe during session, to do this again.
Thank you, Bobby.
So, thanks so much. Best to you.